So let's rejoin the crew of the Starship Enterprise as they journey to the past in order to save the future in the most fun voyage of them all, with Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Following on from the rescue of their comrade Captain Spock and the theft of a Klingon bird of prey, the crew of the Starship Enterprise must return home to Earth to face the consequences of their actions. Spock attempts to retrain his mind in the Vulcan way, as Kirk and McCoy know he has not yet fully recovered all of himself. Meanwhile, an alien probe is on a direct course to Earth, transmitting a disruptive signal that leaves all ships in its path without power. It begins to ionize Earth's oceans and atmosphere. Unable to respond to the probe, the Federation President issues a distress call, which Admiral Kirk and his crew analyze, along with Spock's intellect. Determining that it is indeed the sound sung by humpback whales, which have been extinct for over 2 centuries, the only solution to save Earth from destruction is a slingshot around the sun to travel back in time to retrieve this species. However, traversing the culture of 20th century San Francisco becomes a more awkward proposition than anticipated. With the bird of prey's power source dwindling, Chekhov and Uhura attempt to track down a nuclear power source to extract the photons needed to get them back home. Meanwhile, McCoy, Scotty, and Sulu conceive a plan to construct a whale tank using 23rd century ingenuity with 20th century resources. And lastly, Kirk and Spock encounter Dr. Gillian Taylor at the nearby Cetacean Institute, hoping to gain her cooperation in bringing her beloved whales George and Gracie back with them to save the future and rectify man's short-sightedness that could ultimately doom the entire planet. So Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, hit cinemas about 2.5 years after The Search for Spock on November 26 of 1986, and ultimately became the highest-grossing Star Trek film until 2009, grossing $133 million of about a $24 million budget, and also helmed again by director Leonard Nimoy. After Search for Spock was still a very solid success, they decided to give him a certain amount of freedom on this one. It's like, okay, you proved yourself, you made a good film, you made a hit film, let's see what you can do with a carte blanche to go up and do what you want to. And he was kind of like wanting to do something a little bit more lighthearted in a certain way, because we had so much of this heavy stuff we had dealt with, even in like the motion picture, very heavy subject matter, heavy stuff going on through deaths and sacrifices, all these different things. The last 3 films, it's time to lighten it up, have some fun, do a caper, as he said, and develop things with Harv Bennett as producer and co-screenwriter, and Nicholas Meyer coming back from Wrath of Khan to also work on the script for this, to develop something that just had, again, a very fun sort of momentum to it in a certain ways. And one way they're kind of guaranteeing they were going to have a certain sense of levity with the film was not having a main villain involved with it. They didn't want to have a heavy here. They wanted to have an idea for the casting, the crew and everything to deal with, and have a certain problem they had to resolve, and wanted to deal with time travel as well. And so things just kind of came about and everything, and during the time they were kind of putting together ideas, the whole thing of dealing with like an alien species where they couldn't really talk to it or something like that, a communication problem they had to deal with, and it was just kind of a ecological type of idea that kind of stemmed out from the whole thing with about the whales and everything, where even today there's still endangered species of whales out there and all these different things. And so much of the time was very much heavy on causes back in the 80s, save the whales and all these different things. And so there was a lot of research put into the whole thing, and kind of got into the thick of the entire idea there, and kind of built this story up with Harv Bennett doing all the stuff that was set in the 23rd century, and Nicholas Meyer writing all the stuff that happened in the 20th century in San Francisco. And it was such a fantastic type of thing to just like have Leonard Nimoy come back yet again and see what he can do when the pressure's a little bit off and the constraints aren't so much about the heaviness of the story, and having to deal with a direct continuation of ideas and stuff like that from Wrath of Khan. He could open himself up and see how he can work so much with different tones and have a little bit of a levity, like I said, a little bit of a looseness to everything, and have the cast kind of go off and have a little bit of fun with all they're doing. So it's like you can really see when things are a little bit looser, he doesn't have all that pressure on him as much. You can see that Nimoy has kind of learned, he's kind of evolved a little bit as a director. He has more confidence in what he's putting out on the screen. The whole film just has a better feel to it, better construction of ideas, and better structure overall. It's a much better film than Search for Spock is, in my opinion, in terms of production quality, in terms of cinematography. Just the overall flowing nature of the story just feels like it fits so much better, and it just feels like it's a much more confidently put together film. I love how it kind of starts out a little bit more dramatic in a certain way, that you have the probe showing up and having a little bit of an ominous sense and kind of building the mystery and kind of building a bit of a threat there and everything, while you've got everything with the Federation Council dealing with the Klingon ambassador and everything, talking about everything that happened in the previous film and the stealing of the Klingon bird of prey and all these different things, setting the stage for that element of the story about repercussions that are going to happen to Kirk and his crew. And then you see them on Vulcan with the newly renovated sort of Klingon bird of prey there and everything, and dealing with the situation with Spock, kind of rebuilding his mind and kind of getting the pieces kind of moved back into certain situations in his head where he's not exactly Spock quite yet. He's got the pieces, but they're all kind of still jumbled up in different places. He's not quite got all the pieces connected in the right ways. So you're seeing all this stuff build up, and you get to all the different things that just feel so seamless in a certain way, where you got still the natural splashes, a little bit of humor here and there that always felt just natural for the characters in certain situations and everything like that. And so when the film goes much more back into the 20th century, when the humor becomes much more prominent in the film, it feels so very natural how it moves from what Harve Bennett was writing to Nick Meyer, and just like everything just has such a wonderful flowing quality in that regard, because what they were writing didn't clash with one another. They all understood what the tone was, where they're kind of moving things forward and backwards to, so you can still have the relatability, the humanity, the warmth with the characters, and a little bit of sense of levity in their situation and everything, while you still have dramatic tension building up throughout the story, and then you just move along in these different ways. It shows, again, Nimoy was really much on point with this whole film, just getting just the tones perfect in every moment in this whole film. Just really did a fantastic job in that regard, just because the film is just so entertaining. It's such a wonderfully, nicely humorous film that does with subtlety. It deals with like situational comedy, where the characters are kind of out of their element completely, and they're kind of dealing with this situation. If they're in the 23rd century on a starship, they got all the things kind of figured out, but in this sort of environment where they're very much unfamiliar with 20th century lingo and urban environments and how to traverse the city and all this type of stuff, it's wonderful. It's wonderful because it doesn't degrade the characters in any type of way. It still maintains a certain sense of fun and certain likability with the characters that I just like, that everything feels so very, very organic, and how everything develops for all these characters. And the whole cast is just really very much into this whole thing. And William Shatner has a great balance here. I like the fact that he can maintain the sort of Admiral Kirk sort of seriousness and like sense of command, but he's got the down-to-earth kind of relatable qualities, and he's got a tad bit more kind of Shatner schmooziness in a certain way, that when he's kind of trying to awkwardly deal with the character of Dr. Gillian Taylor here, portrayed by the fabulous Catherine Hicks. I just like the fact that he's got these awkward moments. He's trying to traverse the situation. It's like it's so foreign to him that he can deal with alien races and all these different things and wild ideas out there in the middle of space, but trying to deal with this social situation where he's trying to tiptoe around the fact that he's from space and he's time travel and all this type of stuff is very interesting. It's very fun too. I mean, I'm going to say that a million goddamn times, but it's a very entertaining dynamic that he gets to work with in the film. I just like the fact that you just have a quality that still feels kind of Kirk, but it's a little bit more kind of dialed back in a certain way. It's a little bit more just kind of comfortable and being in the situation and not trying to put up a front of sorts or whatnot in terms of being Admiral Kirk and on the bridge of the ship or whatnot, stuff like that. But you can still see that those moments where he moves from different beats to different beats, depending on what the situation is. So I love the fact you get both of these things, that the comedy doesn't override the entire film. it introduces itself when the situation calls for it. So he does a great job in it. And I just love the fact that Leonard Nimoy as Spock is like the most brilliant straight man you could possibly ever have, because he just doesn't understand comedy. He doesn't understand humor whatsoever. The character of Spock just humor is just a vacant concept to him. And just the whole thing of like more colorful metaphors being used in this time, a double dumbass on you, and all this type of stuff. It's just brilliant. It's just brilliant having him and Shatner working these scenes. Is perfect, beautiful chemistry. I just love everything, and everything they have him do in all these situations, walking around the goddamn robe in the middle of San Francisco is like you're still like the least peculiar people walking around San Francisco. No one's gonna notice you, trust me. But it's just one of these wonderful things, just like this wonderful cast of characters going through this situation and trying to awkwardly move through this entire city and deal with everything, and trying to like come off as like they're competent, but they're in such a deficient type of mode in a certain way where they don't have transportation, all these different things, and they kind of come off as like Kirk and Spock, coming off as almost like kooks or whatnot to Dr. Gillian Taylor. I love the fact that you could almost like see the other version of this film where it's all told from her perspective, and being introduced these two weird guys. Seemed like they escaped from the mental institution or something. You could almost see that version from her perspective solely, and still have it be a great film. But I just love everything Nimoy does with Shatner. They're fun, they're fantastic. But I love the fact that you get all these little sort of beats where he's kind of developing kind of a gradual arc in the whole film. Because again, at the beginning of the whole thing, like I said, he's still not the entire package of Spock. He has certain things to him, but he doesn't have quite the social bonds in place that he had before. So it's like you're still seeing him kind of put it all together as this whole thing goes along, going through these unusual situations and everything. But I love the fact when you get to the end of the film and whatnot, and he decides to stand with his shipmates. You also had that moment earlier on where he decides that we have to go save Chekhov, not because it's the logical thing, but it's the human thing to do. So you see the progression of the character, how it's starting to sort of soak itself into, and all the things are kind of settled back into place with himself, and how he reconnects with his father, Sarek, at the end of the film, portrayed again marvelously by Mark Leonard. He does a fantastic job with this character throughout just a couple of appearances throughout Star Trek. He's a fabulous actor. He did a fabulous job with his character of Sarek. Just made such a impression on audiences to bring him back from the original series, the animated series. A little bit, I think it was there too. And then he shows up in Search for Spock, Voyage Home, and Undiscovered Country, and 2 episodes of Next Generation, and that's the end of it. So about like a half dozen appearances, but made such a strong impression, such a indelible mark on this character, and such a strong mark on the relationship with the character of Spock here. I just love the fact that Spock and Sarek have that moment at the end of the film to kind of reconnect and just have as much of a tearful reunion as a pair of Vulcans could possibly do. So you just have that the little subtleties of things they put in that scene just pulls a little bit of a heartstring, that you just see that Sarek is so grateful to have his son back and went all this way just because this is his son, stand up for him against the Klingon ambassador, all this type of stuff. I really like it. I just really like the whole thing with Spock going this whole thing and just flowing through with a little bit of an arc, seeing that he's kind of settled back into more or less a much more recognizable version of Spock than we had at the beginning of the film, where he's still putting all the little things together there. But guys like DeForest, Kelley, and James Doohan are just having a goddamn fun time. They're having a fantastic rapport and chemistry as they're kind of dealing with the guy at the Plexicorp building and everything like that. And everything with Sulu was kind of... Sulu does, and George Takei does a good job, but they actually had to cut a scene out of the film because he was actually going to meet like one of his ancestors in San Francisco. Is supposed to be this little Asian kid that they encounter, and unfortunately the kid kind of clammed up when the cameras rolled, and they just could not get him to perform in the scene whatsoever, so they had to scrap the whole scene, and George Takei kind of lost a really nice moment he could have had in the film. But Walter Koenig, Nichelle, Nichols, the entire cast does a fantastic job just having the best time they possibly could have. And just like, I just can't imagine how this film could ever be any stronger with their chemistry, the rapport, all this type of stuff. They're all just nailing it so far, and they're just so tuned into the vibe of the film. And again, having Nimoy as director, again, makes it all very much comfortable to know how they can work that, how their personalities work on screen, and how to develop that and kind of move that forward and push it in different directions to make sure all the comedy hits the right buttons at every moment in time. And like I said, Catherine Hicks, I think she is fantastic. She would do Child's Play about 2 years after this, also doing a really good job in that, and she's just great. I just like the fact that they were kind of down to two different actresses for the role, and they kind of invited her and the other actress separately to, I think it was William Shatner's ranch or whatnot, and they kind of sat down and had lunch and kind of talked things over and kind of worked it out. Just have a casual meeting and whatnot, and there was just some kind of spark that hit off between Catherine Hicks and William Shatner, and Bill was just like, this is the lady for the role. This is definitely it. And just love the fact that her as Dr. Jillian Taylor, she just has such a strong spiritedness to how she handles all these situations, that she doesn't roll over for anyone, that when she's dealing with Kirk and Spock and the weird vagaries, what they're kind of imparting upon her, she's very straightforward, very right to the point of situations, but she's so absolutely fascinatingly intrigued about these two weird guys she's encountered here that she can't help but just follow this entire unreal situation all the way towards whatever end is going to hit to, and it's this wonderful quality she has. She's got such great chemistry with Shatner here, and such an emotive relatability as well. You just see the wealth of compassion she has for these animals and everything like that, and she wears her heart very much on her sleeve about the entire situation here. That I love the fact that she doesn't discriminate in any type of way, that she's just so much in love with these two whales, George and Gracie, that everything kind of in her life kind of revolves around them, that she says later on in the film that she really doesn't have anyone else to be connected to in her life, that when she goes back to the Cetacean Institute and they tell her that the whales were shipped off overnight, she slaps the guy in the face, because these two meant as much to her as any friends, any kind of family that she would have had. Just like she's so strongly connected to him that it's just wonderful to see that type of humanity, that type of compassion, that sort of quality within the character, that she has so many fascinating qualities to her as a character, that I just love the fact that she has a backbone, that she can stand up to people, but she's so much a warm-hearted type of character as well. She has a way of fighting what she believes in, standing up for what she feels is right. It's a wonderful type of performance. I absolutely love her. I love what she does this whole thing, that she's someone who's kind of sticks a little bit to Kirk, that not in a negative type of way, but she can one-up him in so many situations, that she's not someone who fawns over him in a certain way. He's the one who's kind of at the disadvantage in the situation. She has the upper hand and everything. So I love that dynamic. I love that sort of relationship they have in the whole thing, and how when she goes to the 23rd century with the rest of them, and she kind of goes off on her own ship and whatnot, she's on her assignment, that she still has that kind of upper hand in the whole thing. It's like, don't call me, I'll call you, and stuff like that. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful. She's got such a brightness, such a life on screen, and just love how she just melds with the whole thing and everything. So she's just a fantastic addition to this cast. Absolutely love it. And it's really great having guys like Brock Peters show up as Admiral Cartwright, who will have a much bigger role in Star Trek VI. John Schuck is a Klingon ambassador who does a fantastic job, always does. You've got Michael Berman, shows up as Starfleet officer at Starfleet Command there. A little cameo from Jane Whiteland of the Go-Go's, who had been in Clue as the singing telegram girl. Would be Joan of Arc in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and she shows up here as kind of a Starfleet communications officer on one of the monitors in Starfleet Command. And also, tennis pro Vijay Amritraj, if I'm pronounced that correctly, who also previously appeared in Octopussy, shows up as the captain of the USS Yorktown here, talking about his engineer putting together a solar sail to generate power for the ship. So, a lot of kind of interesting little things here, and there's also the fact that we get the first appearance of a female captain in Starfleet in this film, with the captain of the Saratoga there as well. So you got two captains of color in Starfleet, and one of them being the first female captain we see on screen. So a lot of really cool little things here in the supporting cast all over the place. So it's like, is a really solid put together cast across the board in this whole goddamn film. For everyone who does all very serious, solid type of work towards the more humorous type of stuff, everyone just runs the full spectrum and does a fantastic job of it. And something else very much of special note here is that this film definitely looks a whole lot better than Search for Spock did, because mainly you're working on much more practical locations. You're not dealing with so much set-bound stuff. But also got a much better cinematographer here in Donald Peterman, who had worked with Ron Howard. He had worked with Barry Sonnenfeld. He'd shoot Point Break. He's a very good cinematographer, and this film has a much better quality to it overall than Search for Spock did. Definitely looks a lot more naturalistic. The previous film looked very artificial, a lot of cases. This one has much more of just an organic sense about how it looks overall, just from how you got all the stuff on Vulcan, all the stuff you have on the Klingon Bird of Prey, which has this sort of industrial haze over everything that gives it a certain quality that is very much a different style of starship from the design itself, but also how it's photographed and how it's all lit and all that type of stuff. Really gives it a sense of mood to it and a certain sensibility about that. But generally, how you just get to the whole place of being in San Francisco in the 20th century, it just has a very naturalistic feel to it. You're just shooting in this very sort of overcast Bay Area that gives this certain sense of grittiness and realism to the whole film. It just feels, again, organic in a certain way, very natural to the environments that you're getting into. It's not overly stylized. Everything has a certain texture to it and a certain sensibility right from the beginning of the film all the way to the end, whether you are back at Starfleet headquarters where things are much more familiar in how it looks and everything, with much more cleaner interiors, stuff like that. But in general, the film just has a much better look to it and all over the place. You've got so many points in time where Nimoy can move the camera in certain places and make use of the San Francisco scenery and all that type of stuff, and this one just overall feels very, very much like a cinematic piece of work here. I think everything they put together with it just looks really damn good, melded with so much with the effects work in this movie that is done on such an amazing level from Industrial Light and Magic, that just starting out with everything they do, just like the Bird of Prey. Again, it's the same model from the previous film, but I think they just do so many really good things in just how it looks in this film. The previous film, there was a very strong vibrance about how it looked. Here it looks even more grungy and industrial in a certain way. I just love all the shots they have. They're just so amped up in a certain way in terms of the quality, in terms of the texture of everything. You see just a way of how they shoot the models in this film looks very, very good, and how it lifts off and flies off from Vulcan, all that type of stuff just has these qualities that just feels like it's furthering the quality of what they're doing, how they're producing the effects, and so much of the goddamn effects in this movie. I don't know how this didn't get nominated for a visual effects Oscar, because they did an amazing work. All the blue screen stuff looks really goddamn good in HD, and they got so many great matte paintings and stuff. Like the entire sort of tank or whatnot they had at the Cetacean Institute, where you have that big open wide shot, is all done with a matte painting. That's all an optical composite, and it looks absolutely positively clean as possible. You really can't tell that there's any type of matte lines or any type of stuff like that. It looks wonderful. And it was such a great thing that they were using all this stuff for humpback whales in the film, and it tricked so many people that they thought all this footage was actual humpback whales, when 95% of the stuff is all animatronic. It's all just manufactured by Industrial Light and Magic to create an illusion on screen that looks so absolutely real. It got PETA getting on the case of the producers and the filmmakers when they barely used any real footage aside from a few shots here and there that were much more kind of like stock footage in a certain way. It's such an amazing achievement of what they did here. Even kind of discovering that Paramount used to have a big tank on their back lot, which ended up getting paved over decades before, after they stopped producing like swashbuckling epics and everything, got paved over into a parking lot. So they dug up the parking lot and recreated the entire tank there to make the entire sequence where they're having to evacuate the Bird of Prey at the end of the film and have the big tail fin of the whales and everything slapping through the water and all that type of stuff, and creating miniature versions of them to shoot underwater in other pools or whatnot to really get all the footage they needed to. They did a fantastic job with this type of stuff. It looks absolutely positively unreal. You can't tell that these are not real whales in the film. They're absolutely positively foolproof illusions, and it's wonderful. And how it didn't get nominated for effects, I don't know. Maybe they're just too good that no one realized they were effects work at the time, because obviously this was released in November, and it was probably maybe a good 8 weeks or whatnot before they'd had Academy voting, and they probably just didn't have the foreknowledge that they'd done such amazing type of work. But it's hard to find a flaw anywhere with the effects work in this film. It looks absolutely fantastic from top to bottom, inside and out. Even the probe they designed this whole thing has such a adds into that whole wonderful mystery of the whole thing, where Paramount wanted to have subtitles for what the probe was trying to say. It's like, do you not understand the context of the movie? The whole thing is like, why are you going to put subtitles to tell the audience what the probe is saying, when the entire point of the story here is that none of the humanoid life in the film, Starfleet, anyone, has any clue what this language is. And even today, we still don't understand what it is. We don't have a way to decipher what the whale song is in our real life here. So to kind of put together like subtitles that tell the audience, like, no, that's utterly ridiculous. And it was so good that the filmmakers like saw that absolutely positively from the outset, fought it completely, and it's like, you don't need that. It's great to have a mystery there. You don't have to understand it. It just adds a certain magic to the entire mystery of the universe and the Star Trek realm and everything. So to just have these whales communicate with the probe, and it's like, whatever they're saying, that's between them, and they understand it, to have this sort of bonding of intelligent life that we can't yet understand. So it's like, it's part of the wonder of exploring strange new worlds and encountering new life and new civilizations, stuff like that. So it's perfectly Star Trek in that type of way, to find that quality in the whole film and hold on to that very much. And so much just like Star Trek itself has taken time always to address social issues and even ecological type of stuff in this film. So it's like they're very conscious of not just using the whale thing as a plot device. They want to bring some attention to it to show that this is a threatened species, endangered species, that we could wipe these species out if we're not careful with our own ecology, stuff like that. So as great mindfulness from the filmmakers, Nimoy, Harv Bennett, Nick Meyer, to write this stuff in the script and be so much involved with it. And something else that was very much grateful to have done is that during the production of the film, the tragedy with the spaceship Challenger happened, and the filmmakers, Harv Bennett, they were like, we need to put a dedication to these people in the film. And apparently one of the preview screenings was at National Aerospace Museum in Washington, D.C., and it got a standing ovation and tears shed for this dedication at the beginning of the film, which I think is just a wonderful type of thing, because Star Trek has always been inspiring towards the space program and astronauts, and the advancement of science and everything has really inspired people to get into those fields of work and everything. So to have that back to them from this fictional inspiration to real life, to show that short tribute to him, was a fantastic type of thing. Another interesting little thing is the score for this film, done by Leonard Rosenman, is that it's kind of an interesting thing. It's like, this score, I really do like it, but it would not work in any other Star Trek environment except this film, which it has a very special tone to it, sort of light adventure aspect to it all and everything like that. So it's kind of interesting where like the main theme that he puts together is like, I could almost see like Christmas trees and snow falling if you throw in a few more little bells in there, whatnot, little sleigh bells. Like, it feels like it's a Christmas theme and whatnot, but it's like, there's a certain quality about it. It's like, I like it because it kind of taps back into the warmth of the film that I really like, that it feels kind of inviting in a certain way. But the fact that these score pieces, the cues that he puts together, are indelibly tattooed into my brain, that I can almost follow the entire film between the sound effects and his cues for one beat to the next. They're so absolutely positively familiar to me. Means I think he did a really good job with it and everything. So moving on from Goldsmith to Horner to Rosenman is a really good thing, and we'll soon get Goldsmith back with the 5th film in the franchise. But I think Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, is just generally a great little film. I think it's just like, it has, again, warmth to it. It's the one I go back to and I watch again, and it feels like there's a certain sense of nostalgia to it and whatnot. There's just a certain embrace to it in a certain fashion. It's like, it's familiar characters. They're not going through tragic situations. They're not losing family members or close friends. There's not peril in a certain sense that you've seen before. You can enjoy the ride with them. They're not in a terrible situation where it's like they're going to die or whatnot. It's like, it's a wonderful, fun adventure to follow them through. And you can absolutely see why this was the most successful, just like by a large margin or whatnot, because you could almost not be any bit more familiar with Star Trek. If you've never really watched Star Trek before, but you're kind of aware of the cultural lexicon of it, you can easily go in this film and follow the entire thing. It feels very inclusive to kind of bring new people into it, to enjoy the whole thing as a fun adventure. It's just really kind of good, because you can even get, at the beginning of the film, you get the replay of the destruction of the Enterprise to kind of clue people in. It's like, why are they in the Enterprise? Well, it got blown up because Klingons were infiltrating and all this type of stuff. You get at least that sort of stuff built up in the beginning of the film for anyone new coming into the whole thing fresh to understand where things are going. So it's like, it's so, even though it's like the conclusion of like almost like an unintentional 3-film arc from Khan, Spock to Voyage Home, it still feels very self-contained, that you can not have seen any of the other previous films and still come into this and get a full, complete story, understand things, and still get a little bit of an arc with certain characters and get rewarded at the end of the film, which is a beautiful moment where Kirk gets the mode back down to captain, and he just got that holding back of the smile there, because as I've talked about, it's like, that's the entire arc of Kirk here, getting back into the captain's chair. So it's like the Admiral thing has always been kind of a weight, a hindrance, something that's kind of shackled him a little bit back, where he's not being able to kind of charge into that situation. Now he's given that back, almost unintentionally, instead of being sort of something that kind of punishes him, it actually rewards him, and rewards him even further when they fly up and they see a brand new Enterprise waiting for them. It's a beautiful moment. That's the absolute perfect moment to end this film on. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's one of the most perfect Star Trek films out there. Nimoy did a fantastic job. There's no doubt in my mind that his work on this absolutely positively won him directing duties on 3 Men and a Baby, which was a major blockbuster success. Sadly, in the early 90s, he had a film that didn't go over very well and kind of got panned by critics or stuff like that. Something went very wrong with it and kind of smolted out his entire directing career from that point onwards. But the few films he has shows he had amazing talent as a director, and this is absolutely one of the best ones he did. All across the board, everything put together so well. Again, the effects work on this thing, even though it got nominated for like best cinematography, best music, best sound design, stuff like that, didn't get visual effects, and that really kind of bothers me. Even though it was up against stuff like Aliens and a few other little things, I think this definitely deserved a nomination in that regard, because it had stellar work all over the place. But regardless of that, guys, what do you guys think about that type of stuff? Do you think it really should have gotten, maybe not won the award, but at least gotten that recognition for it? And generally, what your favorite kind of moments are from the Voyage Home, and your general thoughts are of it? Because you got all the great things like the punk on the bus getting the nerve pinch, which was actually one of the associate producers on the movie, Kirk Thatcher, who had, with a friend or whatnot of his, kind of wrapped that punk song together in about a weekend and slapped it in the film and got a really good scene out of it. Or the nuclear vessel scene with Chekhov and Uhura, where they were kind of shooting that thing from like with a long lens out of a van and whatnot. So they're kind of doing a little bit sort of running gun guerrilla type of thing in a certain sensibility. And the lady who actually stopped and addressed Chekhov and Uhura, Koenig and Nichelle Nichols, actually wasn't really supposed to speak in the scene, because obviously you have to pay people more, extras more, if they're actually going to speak in the film. If they don't speak, then you kind of pay them a much lower rate. So they had to kind of track her down after the take was taken and get her to sign things and write her a more substantial check to be in line with SAG rules and stuff like that. So they're really kind of nice things. There's a whole tons of trivia about this film that's just absolutely delightful all over the place. So It's a really fantastic film. I think it's one of the best, and I can't say much more about it, but there's so much good stuff. So if you guys want to share some of that good stuff in the comments down below, I deeply appreciate it. And always don't forget to like it if you enjoyed the whole exploration of the voyage home here. So I'll keep going. I won't be getting more done before the end of 2019, but I'll definitely be going at least up to Star Trek 6, which means I do have to get to Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier, which will be a very fascinating exploration, guys, but that'll be a few months off from now. But regardless, guys, thanks so much. There's always the Patreon to support a little bit of what's going on here. Get early access to reviews and commentaries, and hopefully I'll be working on some other stuff in the near future, but we'll see how things clear up as we move past the holiday season here at the end of 2019. So guys, thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.